So before we get her on, Harvey Weinstein, this is what we're going to talk about. And I am going to pitch your stuff that whatever questions, whatever thoughts, whatever, comments that you have in the chat, I will throw over to Harriet, maybe not live real time within the course of the discussion, but soon after. And she can respond. So you can ask pretty much, anything you want within the course of the topic. And I know we've been watching a lot of Harriet's talks and videos earlier this week and last week, so you can feel free to go off the Weinstein topic and ask her about any of the things we've talked about, how capitalism is affecting the family, how childcare in the US, these are all the different things we talked about. And Alex, you're going to be keeping an eye on the chat so that even if I don't say your question or comment right away, Alex will be, you'll have your eye on the chat so that when it's time, you can pull that in. Are we all good? Are we ready? So Weinstein, by the way, went on trial yesterday, 2 years after dozens of women came forward to publicly accuse him of sexual assault. It's obviously a very important moment for Me Too and the movement against gender-based violence. Of course, Weinstein and his lawyers would rather things stay exactly the same for women, and will seek to blame the accusers for the assaults. Today, I'm excited that Harriet's going to come on and talk about the implications of that trial. Harriet is, in case you don't know, or you're just joining us, or you didn't see any of the other segments where we talked about her work, she is a mental health counselor and hypnotherapist in practice right here in New York City. Founding member, I might add, of the second wave feminist movement, and has been a radical committed to transforming U.S. personal and political life. She's the host of Capitalism Hits Home, the podcast with Dr. Harriet Fraad, which explores what is happening in the economic realm and its impact on our individual and social psychology. I think this is such important work that she does because it's really important to remember that it's not just you. We live within a context, and that context affects us deeply. Anyway, you can subscribe to her work wherever you listen to podcasts and at Democracy at Work. I'm going to click her in here, Harriet, so that you will be here with us. Harriet, can you hear me? We'll see if it's working. I'm not sure. Unmute. Are you there, Harriet?
Yes, it says you are unmuted by host.
I have unmuted you.
Good.
It's very nice to see you, or well, hear you. I don't actually see you. Are you coming on via video today as well?
I don't know. I am not sophisticated in this particular area.
I understand, and I also understand how wonderful it is. I'm gonna hit a little. Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi, I pressed the little button.
You pressed the little button. It's really great to see you.
Great to see you and hear you. And I hope that we can talk about Mr. Weinstein in the context of all the many sexual abusers who accompany him.
Yes.
Of all faiths and colors.
I think that's important.
One sex, right?
Can you, one sex, all shapes and colors. Good point. Can you talk a little bit about what's happening in the trial? The prosecutor told jurors they're going to be asked to assess whether Weinstein forcibly sexually assaulted the victims, not whether the victim's reaction was the best reaction. The fact that he walked into the courthouse without his walker, which he didn't need that walker until he just happened to get it, oh gosh, saying he was using on it for back problems. Can you talk about what's happening in the trial? And then we'll go to, the context, what it means that Harvey Weinstein could go to jail for life.
Well, as the film on Hulu said, Harvey Weinstein was untouchable, the same way that Bill Cosby, Donald Trump still is, Bill Clinton, and the whole crew. And what's at stake is women's credibility. 80 women testified against Cosby, and many decided not to believe them. But in the end, he was convicted. About 250 women have come out against Epstein. who received, when he went and got a very much of a sweetheart deal, got what amounted to 13 months in jail with a work release for many hours, at least 12 every day, some of which he spent abusing more underage girls. Busy
Ah,
man. So we're talking about an, something that has always happened, but now what has changed is that Me Too has allowed women to speak up. And I think the reason that Me Too has come out is that ever since the 70s, when they exported male jobs and computerized and robotized them, white males, because it was only white and male, can no longer get family wages that support their families.
mm,
And the mass of women have to go out and earn their own money, and therefore are empowered in a way they weren't when they were domestic semi-feudal serfs at home, being supported while they created useful emotional labor and physical labor and sexual labor and childcare and social connections for men, some of whom are feeling rather deprived that they don't have a full-time servant at home. And I think, although they've tried to blame that on women and refugees, it's obvious, and also Black people, it's obviously capitalists who outsource these men's jobs in order to make more profit. And therefore, women have been empowered. We no longer have to be utterly dependent on a man. Black women have always had more independence because their men were not allowed to keep full-time servants in the home because they didn't get paid enough. And
mm.
so that the whole picture has changed, and Me Too emerged out of that changing picture in the way that the second wave of feminism emerged when women started to go back to work in the late 60s and early 70s.
Mm.
So that the whole terrain has changed economically, socially, and it's empowered women to come out against the male privilege of sexually accessing them when they have wealth and power to cover it up.
I think, Harriet, we've had a lot of people chatting in our stream chat today about the issues of race. And I do think that's very important that you touched on the racial dynamics of women in the workplace. Could you talk a little bit more about that? I'd love to hear you expand out about that.
Well, just as in porn, which is ultimately heterosexual porn, is males appropriating women's sexuality without any mutuality of interest, although women comply. Black women are more often presented as animals,
Mm.
you know, and and more sexual and more accessible. And part of the race dynamic is that white men have raped Black women from early slavery, which is why America's people of color are much lighter than Africa's.
Mm.
Not because people got along so well that they became lovers.
Really? It's really because of race? No, no. I mean, that's really interesting. I had never thought of that, that the lighter skin of African Americans is due to rape.
To mass rape.
Wow.
Rape not only from the slave holders and the overseers, but also from teenagers who found women and raped them. And if they were Black, they knew they'd get away with it. So that there is the history of rape has changed, literally changed the complexion of American people of color who
Crazy.
are lighter skinned. Africans often look almost purple because they're so dark, but Americans are very light.
Mm.
And that's not an accident. It's the result of rape. So there is this long tradition of accessing Black women's sexuality without their permission. It's right there in all the books, and that you might want to read on the subject. So that, you Black women have a particular set of strengths and problems. The strength was because Black men never got a family wage, and as a group could not support their women as full-time servants in the home. Black women have been much more independent. They have had to be.
Mm, mm.
And
Especially because of the history of, just arresting Black men in the South after slavery for idleness, putting them in prisons and then making them work for corporations, which was just another form of slavery.
there was a lot more jailing during cotton picking time because you could get chain gangs to pick cotton. So
Huh.
the jails were much fuller then because the labor force of the area wanted beefing up and didn't have to pay for it
Mm.
or paid the jail a pittance, and the men never saw anything. So that we're talking about how the systemic racism of our country has affected Black people, and before that, Indians, because Native Americans were raped from the start by Columbus and his people. Their religion tripped them up because they believed that the gods were white. So instead of shooting Columbus's men when they got off the boat, which would have been more in their interest, they welcomed them
Oh, that's
and
unfortunate. Religion.
got raped and pillaged for their trouble.
Ah.
And the men felt freer because they were people of color. And that is that's a stamp of Cain on the American forehead, that racist, sexist combo, as well as the sexist combo in general.
Harriet, we have a question from our stream chat that is marginally related. Alex, would you like to ask Harriet the question? I think you're keeping it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Hello, Harriet. Good to have
Hi.
you.
Thank
Pleasure
you.
to meet you.
Good to
So
be
we
here.
have a lot of interaction here. There's a stream happening with viewers that are chiming in and having their own back and forth conversation, but sometimes they also ask questions. And one of our viewers asked this question: how did you feel about women that want to be a stay-at-home mother? Do you support these decisions, or would you want these women to aspire for more?
I support those decisions. What I don't support is that they have no protection if the man decides to dismiss them, that they're left alone with their children and without any kind of work experience that's recognized. If our society basically valued childcare, we'll have to say parenthetically that the average childcare worker gets less than the average parking attendant. So if they valued childcare and provided the option, taken or not, of excellent quality childcare, and they valued the emotional labor of taking care of other people who are vulnerable, and they valued menial labor of cooking and cleaning and creating value in the household, emotional value and use values, then women, if they wanted to go back into the labor force, could go back listing their skills, and they would have protection. In Sweden, an unmarried woman with a child gets the same salary as the average man does, because a single mother gets first priority in housing and job security and time off with a child and clothing allowances and everything. I feel like if women want to stay home, they're doing honorable work. My problem is that it is not being rewarded or recognized. And
That is a
if it
problem. I
were,
like the idea of universal daily basic income for everyone and a nice social safety net. I don't understand why we have to push. I mean, we could talk about what happened with some feminism, Gloria Steinem, and the split between feminism being an economic issue and it being about identity. Harriet, you're the one who brought this to my attention. I don't think I said that quite properly, but maybe you could.
well, one of the things that happened is that in the late 60s and the beginning of the 70s, the FBI and the CIA joined together for what was called Operation Great Wurlitzer, because the Wurlitzer was an organ that could change its instrument sound over and over. And they funded people like Gloria Steinem, who's an avowed CIA agent. That came out, although not on television, anyone can find it on the internet. And several people in the civil rights movement to make the civil rights movement a race-only movement and to make against the prescriptions of Dr. King at the end before he was shot, and also Malcolm X at the end before he was shot, that we all need to include class as well as race in our analysis.
Wait
And
a minute.
Gloria
The minute they
Steinem,
started talking about class, then they were shot, and as opposed to identity around race or sex. Interesting.
And you can always find somebody that you can bribe who has a grudge to shoot a person. I don't think that's accidental, because if you go back to King's speeches before he was assassinated, he really emphasized Black and white together for class transformation and race transformation in this society. And same with Malcolm X, when he broke with the Black Muslims and he went to Europe, and in his autobiography, he writes about how I'm being followed around Europe. That is not a local matter, that's a state matter, that I am being followed. And he started talking about the importance of men and women together and Black and white together. And that was before he was assassinated. At any rate, there was that operation, and it was heavily funded. And I remember, as a very naive, enthusiastic feminist of the late 60s and 70s, I thought, wow, Gloria Steinem got us Ms. Magazine, beautiful, slick magazine, and no ads. I didn't think, ooh, where'd the money come from? Very important question. And I think what happened was, because Americans are so naive, and because class had been a repressed discussion ever since the McCarthy period in the 50s, people really didn't get it. I mean, it came up again with the Occupy movement, which was only around for 3 months before there was the coordinated, by Obama, we have to say, crushing in every city of that. But 1%, 99% consciousness stayed on, because Americans were ready to see class dynamics. And so I think what happened was the movements got subverted, and Blacks and whites were seen as enemies, and men and women were seen as enemies, and women who value their traditional labor were devalued, because also one of the things that was changing, for which the CIA and FBI were getting America ready, was reducing white men's salaries and pushing everyone out into the labor force. And so they needed to get people ready to see that as self-assertion, not economic necessity, because we've been crushed.
Okay, I want you to just repeat that last part, because I feel like it has to be underlined. The idea is, oh my gosh, just say that part again about how self-assertion is what the difference between that and the economic reasons for pushing women out into the workplace. They sold it to us as self-assertion, as opposed to saying, hey, women's labor that we do in the home is equally as valuable as some guy working on Fifth Avenue. How do we compensate this as a nation, right?
That's right, which
They
is
screwed
what
us.
they should have done. And men might have had that option too. Nurturing men might have stayed home and been much better child carers than their wives sometimes. You know, it's not a genetic factor, taking care of children. Most women's first reaction when they give birth is, oh shit, what do I do with this? You know,
don't tell anyone that. They get all upset when you're like, if you're not a parent yet and you haven't had that experience, they're like, my mother didn't love me. No, your mother loved you. She didn't know what the hell to do when.
And how should she? Just because she's a woman doesn't mean she knows how to take care of a vulnerable life. And our society doesn't extol the virtues and the strengths and the learnings in caring for a vulnerable life, which is one of the reasons that women entering the labor force and taking time off after reentry earn 42% of what men earn,
It's
whereas
very
women
interesting.
without children make 82%.
Here, it's very interesting. We often talk about society and childcare, and I really loved your point just now that you made about how, and starting with this Gloria Steinem Ms. Magazine business, women like myself and people my generation and younger have been groomed into thinking that the highest form of achievement is outside of the home. We're not really taught, as you've said, how to care for infants. And also, when we go off to college, most people don't stay home and go and get an education. We go off to California, you go off to the city down the street or the capital of your state or wherever you're going, off to college and then off to your job. So to earn. So you're broken away from your family, who could, in the right circumstances, hopefully people would have at least one or two women with some of that knowledge that they have from from having raised their own children, whether it's your own mother or your grandmother or your aunts or your great aunts or some cousins or something. There's just no familial community to help you with that. So you're just kind of dumped out,
Right.
and mothers are very depressed. Postpartum depression is shooting through the roof, and I don't think it's just hormonal. I think it's because we have been taught that achievement is this way, and then when you're given an all-encompassing job that you know nothing about how to do, you've got to like Google, what do I do with this baby?
Right.
It's insane.
And we don't have an alternative community. People are much more mobile, and people don't necessarily appreciate um, their parents or grandparents. And a lot of parents think, oh my God, I had to put up with you. I sure don't want the next generation on my hands. I'm not even responsible. But then
Mm,
there has to be a social support. There have to be neighborhood groups. There have to be mothers and fathers groups of people to talk about their kids, get their kids together so that people aren't isolated. And there has to be a campaign the way there was to get women back in the home after the campaign to get them out and help in the armaments industry, a campaign to show the value of traditional women's labor, which has been grotesquely devalued to get women out of the home.
Harriet, some of the God, you make me feel so much better. Every time I talk to you, I feel just so much better. And I also feel angry for, does anyone in the chat feel this way when you become aware of some bill of goods that you've been sold by society or by some marketing campaign or by someone who seeks to just use you and not interact with you on a human level? I feel so angry that I bought into, the way for self-esteem is to achieve out in the world, as opposed to it is valuable to be making a pie for your loved ones. It's as valuable as any kind of, like, making a car to sell on the market or running the market
Exactly.
or being a horrible person who works on Wall Street. No offense to you, all you Wall
Yeah.
Street workers watching this stream. Um, but anyway, I always find it very liberating to have these conversations. I'm
But
trying to bring that to my.
it's also that women are not, these skills are not valued by the society. And you need to have a campaign of showing the value of these skills to give women that dignity. The only people who say how important it is are the people in the fundamentalist South who want to divide the genders, but who work against every form of subsidy in the household, whether it's public child care or whether it's after school care or whether it's summer care or whether it's support for mothers. And so that they mouth the valuation of women's traditional labor, but they make sure that it's devalued in the marketplace and in the society.
Mm.
It's
Uh,
sad.
we have a
I have
number
a
of
question.
questions coming in from the chat. Dr. RB
Yep.
Win-Win says, generationally, what have you observed are some of the major attitudinal differences regarding race and sexuality, gender, and economic class? That's an enormous question, but just wherever you would like to go with that, Harriet. Generationally, what
Well,
have you observed?
well, there really is a change. For example, by the middle of 2020, the majority of children under 5 will be children of color. And people have had to get used to the fact, because the civil rights movement allowed people of color to have some positions. And so the younger generations are appreciating that and are less racist and less bigoted, I think.
Hmm.
Now, of course, there are different strains. I think of the recent demonstrations of masked men holding guns in, was it Richmond, Virginia? Think if
They're
Black
everywhere. You
men,
could just name any town south of the Mason-Dixon line and you know that you have one. I'm sorry, go ahead.
but think if they had Black men with masks holding guns and demonstrating,
Mm.
what would happen then? The reception would be much worse. The cops would be out in huge number. In my early life as a political person, the Panthers, the Black Panthers, posed on the steps of the New Haven courthouse in black leather berets and jackets holding guns. And before you knew it, so many cops joined the Panthers that their entire trajectory was changed. They were totally invaded by cops as a
Hmm.
threat.
Oh,
And I
wow.
think, these are demonstrations of a kind of toxic masculinity that holds on to the refuges of toxic masculinity, the gun culture, the army culture, the porn culture, and evangelical religions that dictate that women be subordinate according to the accepted Southern Black, no, the Baptist Convention on Men and Women.
Mm.
So that you have refuges, but the society is changing around these men who want to hold on to their guns. They don't realize they're capitalist stooges. The NRA
I
just
love
wants to
it.
sell guns. They're not going to say, sell guns, make me rich. They're going to say, you're a man if you have a gun. And these guys are very worried because their old man privileges are taken away and they haven't figured out a way that a man and a woman can be friends.
I love what you just said, that these people who are, yeah, trying to prop up their manhood with their gun are really just capitalist stooges. I wonder if when they find out they're being used by a system that works against them, works against their children, works against their own interests, if they will be as mad as I was just 5 minutes ago when I just realized that I had been disillusioned by the system. And do you think that we are on the precipice, or how close are we to the precipice of people like waking up to see that capitalism has victimized them? I think even some Trump supporters voted for Trump because they thought, obviously mistakenly, that a businessman who has, I don't know how they could think this, that a businessman who has victimized his own army of people, who is complicit in capitalism, would help them. But I think people are kind of waking up. Our whole chat was about the usefulness of socialism as opposed to capitalism, etc. Your
Well,
thoughts about that?
my feeling is that a lot of people who are perfectly decent people voted for Trump because they wanted to bust the system up, because they felt it was corrupt. And even though he was corrupt himself, he spoke against the swamp. He said he wanted to shake things up. He certainly has shaken and busted things up. And there's a lot of people who are very angry at what's happened, particularly men, because their position has changed. They no longer are in the kind of control they had when they were utterly economically dominant, and women had very few choices. White women, Black women have always had to work because Black men have, in our history, been denied family wages. And so therefore Black women have been more independent. But I think there
It's
is a
being pointed out in the chat that Trump was basically lying when he was saying, I'm going to free you from the swamp.
Yes, he was lying, but it was an appealing lie. And a lot of people don't want to understand that they're victims. They're in denial. They want to think, no, I'm in charge and I'm going to take over and make America racist again or whatever. Not that it isn't now, but you know, that's a hard message. And you're not just a victim. You're also someone who can affect change. And I think a lot of left analysis has pointed out how people are victims rather than, because in some ways we are, but we're also actors.
It's very
colluding.
empowering to know that you've been victimized, because then you can, I mean, you have to have awareness of the victimization and where it's coming from in order to take effective action so that you aren't victimized anymore.
Well, one of the things that the US right wing has accomplished, forgetting all about the New Deal where big government saved people's lives, is they've made government the enemy rather than the capitalists who control it. And what we need government, but we need honest, strong government. And that's what people had with FDR. And so that it isn't that government is bad, it's that our government is bad. And they've put that over on people,
Harriet,
which is terrible.
Can we go back to the question about that the doctor asked about some of the major attitudinal differences as generationally, what you've seen about, I mean, there's three enormous topics here: race, sexuality, gender, and economic class.
Well, one of the things is economic class has changed because the new generation of white men have joined their Black brothers in being unable to make a reasonable living and unable to support a family. One of the reasons that more people are living together now than are married, and that the majority of 18 to 35-year-olds in America for the first time in our history are not married, is people don't have the stability, that their lives are precarious. And so that has changed. Sexuality has changed. Gender is much more fluid. My young clients have sexual relationships with both sexes, and it's not a big deal because you have sex, you're a man and you have sex with another man doesn't make you a homosexual for life. You go back and forth, and that's a change. But the whole idea of American personal life, you grow up, you meet a partner, you go out on dates, you get married, you have children, you stay in your community, that's gone. That was always true of Black people, which is why the blues talk about the only way of mobility. I'm going to pack my bags and go, because it wasn't like I'm going to get that promotion, because that wasn't going to be given. But that's true now of white men as well. And so education has gone up, college has gone up over 100% in the last decade. And a lot of people just are lost. And their manhood, as they previously defined it, is gone. So they look for refuges, which is interesting in terms of the porn refuge. The biggest porn refuge in the United States, the most porn is watched in Utah, the fundamentalist Mormon state.
Wow. Who would have thought it?
I would.
Harriet, these are also interesting questions, and I know our conversation has strayed from the original Weinstein, but I do want to go back to, I mean, there's Epstein, which is still something interesting happening, and Weinstein, which is like very current happening. The issue of we talked about Trump and having transactional relationship, and this issue of his not understanding what real relationship is versus having a transactional relationship. Can you talk a little bit about, first of all, define what transactional relationship is, how it relates to obviously capitalism, because it seems like we're all being indoctrinated to just have only transactional relationships, and it's affecting people's ability to love, to connect. Your thoughts?
Well, I think a transaction is an exchange of goods or services between two people. And Weinstein's defense, part of his defense, is these were transactions. They weren't rapes. These women knew that if they put out sexually, they might get a role. And that's holy. That's capitalist holy transaction. There's nothing wrong with that. Rather than should the person in power, because they're a potential maker of someone's career, get favors sexually because he has the power to make or break their careers. So that it's as if a transaction is holy. And in capitalism, everything's a transaction. And in country music, which is kind of right-wing populism set to music, they talk about how, but at home, I've got all these things, pressures on me, but at home, she loves me and she's there and she's this and she's that. Well, she's a prisoner usually. And
Yep.
the transaction is she has very limited wage possibilities. And the more children she has, the more trapped she is.
I
And
don't
there's
think
no
you know
support
just
for
how
children.
fabulous some of the things you're saying are, right? That country music is right-wing populism set to music. I just love that. But yes.
That's right. And it's that I've got you, even though I'm poorly paid and all that, I've got you and all that. And one of the really disturbing things for a lot of men is they don't have the lady at home trying to compensate for the ravages of the market.
Mm,
The woman is working too, and she doesn't want to serve him so much when she gets home.
Well, she's tired. She has a job just like he does.
Right. Women initiate 70% of the divorces now. And that's
Really?
something new, because the old deal where you work for him is a little less attractive if you're working outside the home all day. Then you want more collectivity at home. You don't want to then just go into household service on the second shift. So, it's changed. And with it, gender has become more fluid. And people are more, it isn't only Black people who are marginalized and shoved down the economic ladder as a way of disguising what capitalism does to people.
Mm.
It's all people except those in the 1% or the top 20% whose connections and money allow them the unpaid internship and the chance to get ahead on the job. Now, there's exceptions. There's exceptions to everything. And it's very important to understand that the terrain has changed, which has a lot of people upset and a lot of people exhilarated.
Can we shift just a little bit to, because I know you and I have had this discussion, and I think it's just wonderful to bring out Epstein. I don't know how many underage people Weinstein. I can't keep these all straight. We got you Cosby, you got you there's so many, but there is this idea of not idea, but there is this I guess plague of underage girls and
Right.
molesting children.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about what the thought system of capitalism has to do with the idea and patriarchy have to do, like, why are people molesting young people, the young children? I know it's a sickness, but it seems like a sickness that's also almost enforced in a certain way by the thinking of society.
It is, and ads for, children used to, in my day, a long time ago, dress differently from adults. Now these little kids are in these sexed up outfits,
Yeah.
not the little dresses and little pants and stuff that men wear, particularly little girls are all sexed up. And I think as women become more equal and demanding, men are more interested in children who are not demanding, who have no sense of themselves, who can't stand up for themselves, whether it's R. Kelly or Epstein. And they both preyed on girls who were from poor families or homeless in order to manipulate and dominate them. Because if sex means dominance for you, it's much easier to dominate children than adults. So if you're Roy Moore or
Ugh.
you're Epstein or you're Weinstein didn't specialize in girls. He specialized in young women trying to make it in the film industry who gave him a position of domination. He was, as the Hulu documentary says, untouchable.
Ugh.
So he said and did all kinds of things. He paid off people occasionally, and like Epstein sometimes did. And certainly Trump tried. You could see it with Stormy Daniels.
Mm.
It's only when the payoffs don't work and the silence isn't maintained, the silence for which they paid, the non-disclosure clauses, when they disappear, people speak out. But I think the attraction to children, like in the case of priests, it's because their sexual development usually stops at about 13 when they enter the seminaries and the priesthoods, where they're usually sexually abused by other priests. But that their sexuality was arrested because it wasn't allowed to develop to people their age as they matured.
Ugh.
But for a lot of men, the allure of helpless, naive, unempowered women and that mixture of sex and domination is very strong. And
Wow.
that's why young people, whether it's R. Kelly or Epstein, certainly are very powerful. Women's economic position and their aspirations in entertainment disempowered them and allowed Weinstein, with all his money, to rape people and silence the police and the hotel security where he raped people and smashed their doors in.
Yes.
So,
Harriet, we're coming to the end of our segment, and I really appreciate you being here. If anyone in the stream chat has any questions they'd like to put up for Harriet about any of the things that we've talked about, now is the time. Or if you just want to make a comment, we've been getting a lot of really nice comments. People happy to know that you're live here with us, and that they're just a lot of great comments here, like I love this lady and she's telling the truth, etc. So don't forget to follow her on, you can go to anywhere podcasts are found and get Capitalism Hits Home. That's Harriet's podcast. We poke into it here on the stream on Twitch regularly. And as we close out, if no other questions come in, just back to the current Weinstein trial. As this trial continues, how do you see this trial fitting into the larger system of justice for victims of sexual assault?
well, you see that a man whose money and power made him untouchable for generations is now on trial. That in and of itself changes the terrain, that he is now having to be accountable. The trial hinges on Weinstein's defense trying to, well, disempower the women by discrediting them. He hired Black Cube, a big, former Mossad members, to do research, to find dirt on whoever accused him so that he could really, I don't want to say blackmail, it's kind of racist, so that he could disparage them in the press and make sure that they couldn't work again. But you have accountability. Now, I don't know whether his $3,000 an hour lawyers, it's about what he's paying there, will be able to get a jury to disbelieve women because of aspects of their own behavior.
I hope there's women on that jury.
Well, they disqualified all white women. The
What?
defense, yeah, the
Oh,
defense has a large number of automatic refusals that they are allowed.
wow.
And so the jury is mainly men, 7 men and 5 women, and they
Wow.
disqualified all of the women that they could, the
Wow.
white women that they could, particularly because they felt that they were the enemy. The people he raped, his victims were overwhelmingly white women. And so, he was afraid they might identify.
We have a whole bunch of questions coming in. Um, a whole bunch. So can I pop them over to you, Harriet?
Sure.
Okay, these are great. And okay, so let's see. Dr. RB has asked us if you've ever read the book The Telling by Ursula Le Guin and your thoughts on her description of how society captures its own wisdom.
I
I don't
haven't
know.
read that book. I've read others of Le Guin, and I think societies capture lots of different wisdoms depending on the different media streams that people are subjected to
We're
and
trying
their
to
life
subject people
situations.
to a wonderful media stream here, and
Yes,
we're happy that you're a part of it.
thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Lord Fortus says, Harriet is awesome. I used to be very against prostitution until I was made aware of the violence made against sex workers due to regulations against them. Is legalizing the practice the sole present solution? And how do we ensure folks don't enter that line of work without their own consent?
Well, one of the things that we have to do is stop trafficking in women, where our efforts are not at all on par with the problem. The second thing is having 85% of prostitutes remember how they were sexually abused as children. And so that the incentive is there. Plus, there's lots of things. One of them is that if you're treated as all you have to offer is sex, then you would be more likely to be a sex worker. Also, if as a woman you're denied decent employment in every other area, a young woman without a college degree is not going to find anything as lucrative. Plus, if you look at the whole idea of sugar babies, where you get tuition and other monies for being available to a rich man, you can, otherwise, a lot of women can't go to college.
Mm.
You'd have to deal with the economic incentive to be a sex worker because it's the only way you can make a decent living as a young woman, or the only way you can get through college that you can see, because sex workers can be well paid.
So
If you
Bernie
took away
Sanders
those
free college could go toward helping people not enter
sex
prostitution
work,
without their consent. That would be one.
absolutely, it would be. And also really giving people opportunities to make a decent living would have fewer pimps.
What will we do with all the out of work pimps, Harriet?
Right.
They need work too.
Well, they can be retrained,
Yeah.
but
We'll do some training programs in sales,
that's
etc.
right.
Oh
Yes,
goodness. Oh,
they're
oh,
very
James
persuasive.
says they can all run for Congress. That's very funny, James. I love you.
Yes, well, there's a lot. Look, you also have to make proportional representation so that if you get 10% of the votes, you have 10% of the seats in Congress. So it isn't winner take all, and you'd have to actually, instead of having the best democracy money can buy, you'd have to do what many other countries do, which is give a certain amount to every party and not allow any ads except on television, where they're all in a row saying what they stand for. So you can't buy the election with money. That
Harriet,
would change.
thank you so much for being on the stream today. I really, really appreciate it. I
Thank
hope you'll
you
come
so
back and
much.
join us again. I know we started
I
with
do
one
hope so.
topic and then talked about everything.
Well, they all relate, so it's fine.
That's
You
great.
know. Thank you so
And
much.
I look forward to being with you. We're going to be together at the Judson Memorial Church, and hopefully we can find a way to. Oh, I think you're already. People will be able to find it on the internet. It's on February 12th. I'll tell you more about it. as we go. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Harriet.
Thank you.
Have a great
Bye-bye.
day. Bye.
Bye.